Here is my entire Angry Birds collection as of February 2026. Here is a K'NEX Red figure, 2 extra K'NEX Reds, K'NEX Super Red, three Mattel Super Reds. Here are 2 Lego Reds. Here are 2 Commonwealth Red figures. Here is a Sonic Red figure. Here is a knockoff red squeaky toy. Here's this Angry Birds movie red figure that I don't know what it goes to. Here's this Angry Birds movie red figure. Here's this Angry Birds roller figure. It's got wheels on the bottom. Here's this really old beat up Angry Birds movie red figure. Here is a Luke Skywalker telepod. Here are my 2 previous 3D printed red figures. Here is a 3D printed red figure based off of his Power Swap design from the fan game Angry Birds Power Trouble. Here are a bunch of random 3D printed test print reds. These are a bunch of 3D printed reds I made as test prints to figure out how big I needed to make them. Here is a Commonwealth Mighty Mojo red plush, 8-inch red plush. Here are my K'NEX blues. Here are all of my extra K'NEX blues. Here is a Mattel blue. Here is a K'NEX Lightning Bird. Here is a Mattel Lightning Bird. Here are a bunch of old clay blues. Here is a 3D printed blue. Here are some really crappy clay lightning birds. Here is a Jedi Youngling telepod. Here is a K'NEX Chuck. Here are my extra K'NEX Chucks. Here is my Mattel Chuck. Here are 2 Knock on Wood and On Thin Ice Chucks. Here is a K'NEX Laser Bird. Here is a really bad clay laser bird. Here are 2 McDonald's Chucks. Here is another McDonald's Chuck and a Chuck roller figures. Here are 3 Carbonite Han Solo telepods. Here is a really old clay Chuck. Here is a Commonwealth Mighty Mojo 8-inch Chuck plush. Here is a K'NEX bomb. Here are 2 Mattel bombs. Here is a Knock on Wood bomb. Here is an Angry Birds movie bomb figure. A small Angry Birds movie bomb figure. Here is a bomb roller figure. Here is a McDonald's bomb figure. Here is a bunch of clay bomb figures. Here is a really crappy clay firebomb figure. Here is a K'NEX Matilda. Here is a Mattel Matilda. Here is a Lego Matilda. Here are two Commonwealth Matilda figures. Here are two 3D printed Matildas. Here are a bunch of previous clay Matildas. Here is a Connects Hal. Here is a really old clay Hal. Here is a Connects Terence. Here are two extra Connects Terences. Here are two On Thin Ice Terences. Here is a 3D printed Incredible Terence. Here are two Angry Birds movie Terence figures. One is big and one is little. Here is a Chewbacca figure. I think it's made by Jenga, I'm not 100% sure. Here is a Connects Bubbles. Here's my extra Connects Bubbles. I won't show too much because it's the same just without the tail feather. Here is a Mattel Bubbles. Here are a collection of a bunch of clay bubbles. The one with the broken head feather is actually the first clay figure I ever made. Here is my clay puffed up bubbles. Here is my clay Stella. Fortunately, I do not have the Connects one. She's pretty hard to get. Here are a bunch of old clay Stellas. Here is a Lego Stella. Stella Roller. And a Padme Telepod. Here is a Commonwealth Mighty Mojo 8-inch Stella plush. Here is a Connects Icebird. Here are three Mattel Icebirds. Here are two clay Icebirds. Here is my clay Silver. Here is a collection of all my previous clay Silvers. Here is my clay Melody. I plan on remaking her. Here are all my previous clay Melodies. Here is my clay Ruby. This is Creamajaw's Ruby. Here is an old clay Ruby, plus a really old clay Girlbird figure. Here is my clay Joe. Here is my clay Gordon. And here's both of my old Joe and Gordon clay figures. Here is my clay Poppy. Here is my clay Luca. Here is my clay Willow. Here is Willow without her hat. Here is my previous clay Willow. And here's my clay Dahlia. Here is my clay Tony. Here is my previous 3D printed Tony. Here is a clay Hockey Bird. Here are all of my other Star Wars telepods. There are some pigs in here, but I don't care. I don't have anywhere else to put these guys. Here are two clay figures of my previous OC, Stripe. I have since adopted a new OC. Here is a clay figure based off of the YouTuber DJ Cook. I used to be like the biggest DJ Cook blazer back then, and now I don't really care for his videos. Here is a Commonwealth Mighty Mojo 16-inch Mighty Eagle plush. Here is a 5-inch Commonwealth Mighty Eagle plush based off of his movie design. Here's this weird Mighty Eagle figure. Here is a custom papercraft Mighty Dragon figure. Shout out to Gerard the Redbird for his Mighty Dragon tutorial. Moving on to the pigs, here is a K'NEX King Pig. Here are all my knock on wood Mattel King Pigs. Here are 2 clay King Pigs. Here is a Mattel Foreman pig. Here are 3 extra Mattel Foreman pigs. You would be surprised about how common this guy is. Here is a K'NEX Foreman pig. Here are 2 characters based off of Luigi Fan 00001's Angry Birds Plus series. The Foreman pig with the monocle is based off Reginald, and the Foreman pig with the cowboy hat is based off the cowboy pig from his Plus series. Here are 2 Mattel Knock on Wood Foreman pigs. Here are 2 previous clay Foreman pigs. Here is my clay Corporal pig. Here's that same Corporal pig but without his helmet. Here is a Mattel Knock on Wood Corporal pig. Here are 2 3D printed Corporal pigs. Here's a big helmet pig. Here are a bunch of previous clay Corporal pigs. Here is a clay chef pig with a removable hat. Here are my 2 previous clay chef pigs, both of which used to share the same hat. Here are 2 3D printed figures of Ross and Mechanic Pig. Here's a really old clay Mechanic Pig. Here is a clay Piggy McCool. Here are 2 clay figures of Professor Pig and Chronicler Pig. Here is a Darth Vader figure. Here are 3 really old clay Stormtrooper pigs. Here is a collection of a bunch of random old clay pigs. Here are 2 clay cowboy pigs, one of which is unfinished. Here's a collection of all the Leonard figures that I have. Here is a really terrible El Porcador papercraft. Here is a giant Big Bork papercraft figure, so I will not be using him for anything because he's just way too big. Here is one of the 15.5 K'NEX Minion pigs that I have. Here are all 9 of my small K'NEX Minion pigs. Here are 2 K'NEX Minion pigs, one of which is a snowman pig and one of which is a frozen Minion pig. Here are 10 Mattel Minion pigs. Here is one of each size 3D printed Minion pig that I have. Including Ross and Mechanic Pig, I have 56 3D printed Minion pigs. Here are my 3D printed Minion pigs based off the pre-chrome design. Here are 3 old Mattel Minion pigs. Here are a bunch of old clay Minion pigs. Here is this pig with flags. I think it's from an Angry Birds Go set, but I don't know which one it is. Here's a collection of a bunch of random Angry Birds movie Minion pigs. Here are these two random things. I know the yellow one's from McDonald's and the white one's from an Angry Birds Go set. And finally, to end this video, here is an 8-inch Commonwealth Mighty Mojo Minion Pig plush, one of 3 that I have. Well, that was my Angry Birds collection. This took a while, and I don't expect to do this again for a while, so yeah. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah.